That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The first light of dawn crept over Aldershot's training grounds, a thin mist clinging to the dew-soaked grass like a reluctant fog. The air carried the sharp tang of wet earth and polished leather, the kind that seeped into your bones on an early October morning in Hampshire. At the edge of the parade square, the recruits of 3 Platoon, 2nd Battalion, the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment, stood in 3 ragged lines, their breath visible in the chill. Rifles at the slope, boots planted firmly on the gravel, they awaited the Sergeant Major's inspection. It was a standard drill, the sort that ground discipline into fresh faces, straight from basic training, nothing more than the daily rhythm of life at Keogh Barracks. Sergeant Major Ellis paced the front, his polished pace stick tapping against his thigh with the precision of a metronome. A veteran of 2 tours in Helmand, he embodied the unyielding backbone of the British Army. Broad-shouldered, face etched with lines from years under the sun and rain, voice a low rumble that cut through the quiet without need for volume. "Eyes front, lads," he said, his tone clipped and even, scanning the ranks for the slightest lapse. "This isn't a holiday camp. Posture tells me everything I need to know about your commitment." Among the platoon stood Lance Corporal Elena Hargrove, positioned at the end of the 2nd rank. At 28, she was older than most of the recruits by half a decade, her frame lean and unassuming beneath the standard-issue combat trousers and olive-drab jacket. Her boots, scuffed at the toes, the leather cracked from what looked like indifferent care, drew more than one sidelong glance. They were issued kit, regulation black, but on her feet they seemed almost comical, as if she'd trudged through a dozen muddy fields without a thought for appearance. Hargrove kept her gaze fixed ahead, chin level, hands clasped behind her back. She didn't fidget like the privates to her left, nor did she puff out her chest like the eager lance corporals trying to impress. Just silence, a quiet competence that blended into the line without fanfare. Private Jenkins, a lanky lad from Manchester with a mop of ginger hair peeking from under his beret, couldn't resist. As Ellis turned to inspect the 1st rank, Jenkins leaned ever so slightly toward his mate, Private Davies, and muttered under his breath, "Look at Hargrove's boots. Bet she nicked 'em from the scrap heap. Woman's got no pride in her turnout." Davies stifled a snort, his shoulders twitching, but he kept his eyes forward. The whisper rippled subtly down the line, a faint undercurrent of mockery that Hargrove must have heard. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly, but she gave no sign, no retort, no glare. Just that steady posture, boots rooted to the gravel, as if the words were no more than the wind rustling the distant pines. The parade square itself was a testament to the regiment's history, a vast expanse of crushed stone bordered by low brick barracks, their red facades weathered by decades of drills and deployments. Overhead, the Union Jack hung limp in the still air from a flagpole scarred by countless ceremonies. In the distance, the faint hum of a Land Rover engine signaled the arrival of the quartermaster's stores wagon, its tires crunching over the access road. This was Aldershot, the home of the army, over a century of soldiers marching these paths, from the Boer War to the sands of Iraq. The routines were sacred, roll call at 600, followed by physical training. Then breakfast in the mess hall, where the clatter of trays and the aroma of strong tea marked the start of the day. Ellis completed his circuit and halted before the platoon, his eyes narrowing on Hargrove for a fraction longer than the rest. "Lance Corporal Hargrove," he barked, voice carrying across the square without effort. "Step forward." She did so without hesitation, her boots scraping softly on the gravel. The platoon held its breath, the mist swirling around her ankles. Ellis circled her once, gaze dropping to those offending boots. "Your footwear, Lance Corporal. It leaves much to be desired. Regulation requires a standard of care that reflects the regiment's pride. Explain." Hargrove met his eyes levelly, her voice steady and measured, laced with the soft vowels of her West Country origins. "Sir, they're serviceable, Sergeant Major. Worn in from field exercises, but they hold up." A murmur escaped the ranks, Jenkins again, no doubt. Ellis's face remained impassive, but his pace stick tapped once sharply. "Serviceable won't cut it on my square, Hargrove. Polish them by evening, stand easy. Or you'll be on extra duty scrubbing the lot. Understood? Understood, Sergeant Major, she replied, her tone betraying nothing. No defiance, no apology. Just acceptance, quiet and absolute. She stepped back into line, the moment passing like a cloud shadow over the grounds. As the platoon was dismissed for PT, the recruits broke formation with the low chatter of men shaking off the morning stiffness. They jogged toward the training yard, where the assault course waited under the grey sky, low crawls through mud, rope climbs slick with dew, and sprints across the open field. Hargrove fell in at the rear, her pace even, breathing controlled. Jenkins and Davies jogged ahead, their laughter carrying back. "Bet she trips on those boots first," Jenkins said, loud enough for half the platoon to hear. "Reckon she's here for the pay packet, not the march." Corporal Reed, the section's second in command, overheard and shot them a warning glance but said nothing. Hierarchy demanded order, not interference in the small cruelties that tested resolve. Hargrove's expression didn't change. She simply adjusted her stride, eyes on the path ahead. The cold air bit at exposed skin, and the first drops of rain began to patter down, turning the ground to a sheen. In the mess hall later, over mugs of builder's tea and plates of porridge, the whispers would continue. About her unpolished boots, her reserved manner, the way she volunteered for the grunt work without complaint. She was competent, yes, but unremarkable. A lance corporal who faded into the ranks, her past as opaque as the thickening mist. Yet beneath that silence lay something deeper, a hidden fracture in the routine. No one knew of the faded ink on her forearm, concealed by her sleeve. A mark from operations long classified, ties to Hereford's shadowed halls that even Ellis couldn't guess. The morning wore on, the rain steadying into a fine drizzle, and the platoon pushed through the course. Hargrove moved with an economy of effort, scaling the walls, navigating the trenches, her boots gripping the earth without complaint. The mockery lingered, a quiet undercurrent, but she endured it as she did the weather, with the restraint of one who had faced far worse under different skies. By midday, as the recruits filed into the cookhouse, steam rising from tureens of stew, the base hummed with its familiar cadence. Lorries rumbled past the perimeter, and in the distance, a helicopter's rotors thrummed faintly from the airfield. Aldershot carried on, oblivious to the tension building in its midst. A single soldier, underestimated, standing firm amid the hierarchy's unyielding grind. The crack in discipline was there, subtle as a boots-worn sole, waiting for the right pressure to widen. The afternoon sun struggled to pierce the overcast sky above Aldershot, casting a muted pallor over the training fields, as the platoon regrouped for the next phase of the day's regimen. Keogh Barracks thrummed with the ordered pulse of military life, the distant bark of a drill instructor, echoing from the adjacent company lines, the steady clip-clop of horses from the mounted section stables, and the faint scent of diesel from the vehicle park, where mechanics serviced the fleet of Foxhound, protected patrol vehicles. This was the heart of the Army's Southern Command, a sprawling garrison where traditions forged in the mud of Flanders and the heat of Basra were etched into every routine. No grand gestures here, just the quiet insistence of discipline, where a soldier's worth was measured in posture and precision, not words. Lance Corporal Hargrove moved through the post-PT cleanup with the same unhurried efficiency she'd shown on the assault course. In the ablutions block, a row of utilitarian sinks under harsh fluorescent lights, she stripped off her sweat-dampened jacket and rinsed her face with cold water from the tap. The mirrors, fogged from the platoon's collective exertions, reflected a sea of young faces, privates scrubbing mud from their webbing, lance corporals barking reminders about kit maintenance. Hargrove's reflection stared back impassively. Dark hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes steady. The faint lines at her mouth hinting at years beyond her rank suggested. She dried her hands on a rough towel, then shouldered her day sack and joined the file heading to the armory for weapon checks. Sergeant Ellis oversaw the process from the doorway, his arms folded across his chest, the chevrons on his sleeve a silent testament to his authority. "Rifles in, magazines out, bolts forward and checked," he intoned, his voice carrying the measured cadence of a man who had recited such orders 1,000 times. The platoon complied in near silence, the metallic clicks of SA-80s being stripped and inspected, punctuating the air like Morse code. Hargrove's movements were fluid, almost economical, no flourish, no wasted motion. She presented her rifle to the armory corporal with a nod, her gloved hands steady. The corporal, a wiry Scot with a neatly trimmed beard, gave it a cursory glance and stamped her logbook. "Clean as a whistle, Lance Corporal," he said, a note of reluctant approval in his tone. Outside, the platoon formed up again on the drill square, the gravel still damp from the morning's drizzle, crunching underfoot as they stamped into position. Major Cartwright, the company commander, had arrived for the afternoon briefing, his presence adding a layer of formality to the proceedings. Tall and erect, with the silver eagles of his rank glinting on his shoulders, he stood atop a low dais flanked by the colour sergeant, who clutched the company guidon like a sacred relic. The Union Jack fluttered weakly in a brief gust, its edges frayed from exposure. "Platoon attention," Ellis called, and the ranks snapped to, boots striking the ground in unison, a sound that reverberated off the brick barracks like a drumbeat. Cartwright's address was brief, delivered in the clipped received pronunciation that marked his Sandhurst pedigree. "Gentlemen and Lance Corporal Hargrove, this week's training will test your mettle in combined arms exercises. Expect long marches, live fire simulations, and no quarter for lapses in standards. The regiment's reputation rests on your shoulders. Dismissed." As the platoon broke, the undercurrent of whispers resurfaced. Private Jenkins, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, fell in beside Davies near the water bowsers. "Did you see her on the course?" Hargrove plodded through like she was out for a Sunday stroll. "Those boots of hers, probably why she's always at the back. Reckon she's pulling her weight or just coasting?" Davies nodded, filling his canteen with a slosh of water. "Aye, and that accent. West Country farmer's daughter, maybe. Doesn't fit with the rest of us." Ellis gave her an easy pass on inspection, too. Favoritism, that. Hargrove, collecting her own canteen a few paces away, filled it without pause, the water gurgling into the metal container. She heard the exchange, Jenkins's voice carried on the breeze, but her expression remained neutral, eyes fixed on the horizon where the South Downs rolled gently under the grey sky. She capped the canteen and slung it over her shoulder, joining the tail end of the column as they marched to the range for marksmanship drills. The path wound past the memorial garden, where stone plaques bore the names of the fallen from past campaigns, a solemn reminder of the cost of that quiet professionalism. At the firing point, the platoon settled into firing lanes, the butts party raising targets with the whine of winches. Corporal Reed, overseeing Hargrove's section, positioned her at lane 7. "5 rounds grouped fire, Lance Corporal, keep it tight." She assumed the prone position, cheek welding to the stock, her breathing evening out as she sighted down the barrel. The first shot cracked out, followed by 4 more in rapid succession, each one a clean hit, the target flags dipping to signal impacts clustered at the center mass. Reed checked the scorer's board and grunted approval. 98%. Solid shooting. The praise drew a few glances from the adjacent lanes, but Jenkins, finishing his own string with a wider spread, couldn't let it pass. As they stood to clear weapons, he leaned over the lane divider. "Lucky grouping, Hargrove. Wind must have been on your side. With boots like those, you're probably more at home shooting rabbits back home." A chuckle rippled from Davies and a couple of others, quickly stifled under Reed's sharp look. Hargrove cleared her rifle with mechanical precision, chamber empty and bolt forward, before responding. "Wind's the same for everyone, Private," she said evenly, her voice low but clear, carrying no edge. She shouldered her weapon and moved to the reloading point, leaving the laughter to dissipate like smoke. The day pressed on into evening, stand easy, the platoon filing into the mess hall as the light faded to a bruised purple. The hall was a long, low-ceiling space, its walls lined with regimental photographs, faded images of khaki-clad soldiers in the trenches of Ypres, more recent ones from the streets of Belfast. Steam rose from the serving counters, where cooks ladled out shepherd's pie and peas, the aroma mingling with the sharp bite of vinegar from the pickle trays. Hargrove collected her tray last, balancing plate, cutlery, and a mug of tea, strong with a splash of milk, no sugar. She chose a seat at the end of a long table, away from the clusters of animated conversation. Jenkins and his group settled nearby, their trays clattering down. Over the scrape of forks and the hum of voices, Jenkins's commentary continued. "Pass the salt, mate. And Hargrove still got those boots on under the table? Hope you've polished 'em like Ellis said, or you'll be scrubbing latrines till Christmas." Davies smirked, forking into his pie. "She's quiet as a mouse. Bet she's got stories, but nothing worth hearing. Just another body filling a slot." Hargrove ate methodically, her knife and fork moving with deliberate care, gaze on her plate. The mockery washed over her like the persistent Aldershot rain, unwelcome but endured. Around her, the hierarchy held firm, privates deferring to corporals, sergeants conversing in low tones about upcoming exercises, the major's table at the head silent, save for the rustle of paperwork. This was the order of things, the rigid structure that bound them all. Yet in her silence, Hargrove's competence shone through, the way she volunteered to clear the tables without prompt, stacking trays with efficient stacks, or how she lingered to assist a younger private struggling with his bootlaces, her instructions concise and kind. As the mess emptied, the evening chill settling over the barracks, Hargrove made her way to the polishing bench in the platoon room. She sat alone under the bare bulb, cloth in hand, working boot black into the cracked leather with slow, circular motions. The rhythm was meditative, the scent of polish grounding her amid the day's echoes. Outside, the parade square lay empty, boots' imprints fading in the gravel, the base settling into its nocturnal hush. No one saw the faint tattoo peeking from her rolled sleeve as she labored. A subtle insignia, wings and dagger intertwined, a relic from shadowed days in the regiment's orbit. The whispers would persist, the underestimation a constant companion, but Hargrove pressed on, her reserve a shield forged in trials far from Aldershot's ordered grounds. The evening deepened, the first stars pricking the sky, and the garrison carried its secrets into the night. The following morning dawned with a persistence that belied the reluctance of the Hampshire sky, a fine drizzle threading through the air like silver needles over Keogh Barracks. The platoon assembled at 5:30 for the long tab, a 12-mile forced march across the training estate, weighted packs slung low, rifles carried at the trail. The gravel path from the barracks wound past the vehicle sheds, where the low growl of generators hummed in the pre-dawn quiet, and out toward the open heathland that stretched toward the Farnborough Heights. Sergeant Major Ellis led the column, his pace unrelenting, the crunch of 47 pairs of boots forming a rhythmic cadence that echoed the regiment's unyielding ethos. "Keep it tight, lads," he called over his shoulder, his voice steady against the patter of rain. "This isn't a stroll to the naffy. Endurance is earned, not given." Lance Corporal Hargrove fell in midway down the line, her pack straps biting into her shoulders. The weight of ammunition pouches and water bottles a familiar burden. Her boots, now polished to a subdued gleam from the previous evening's labor, gripped the uneven terrain without complaint, though the leather still bore faint scars from past exertions. The platoon stretched out behind her, privates gasping through the early miles, lance corporals barking encouragement to maintain formation. The air was thick with the scent of damp gorse and sodden earth, the kind that clung to uniforms and seeped into the spirit, testing resolve before the halfway mark. Private Jenkins, positioned just ahead with Davies, had shed none of his bravado despite the load. As the column crested a low rise, the path narrowing to a single file through a stretch of boggy ground, he glanced back at Hargrove. "Oi, Hargrove," he said, pitching his voice just loud enough to carry forward and back. "Those boots holding up, then? Or are you about to sink like a stone? Wouldn't want to fish you out. Might ruin the march." A ripple of muffled laughter spread from the front ranks, Davies joining in with a snort, his pack shifting as he adjusted his stride. Corporal Reed, nearer the head, shot a glance but held his tongue. The chain of command allowed for such barbs in the grind of training, so long as they didn't fracture the pace. Hargrove's response was her silence, her eyes fixed on Jenkins's back, breath measured and even. She lengthened her stride slightly to close the gap, her posture unchanging, shoulders square, chin level, the rain tracing rivulets down her helmet brim. The mockery was a constant now, woven into the platoon's rhythm like the drizzle itself. Comments on her kit during kit checks, sidelong jibes at water breaks about her farmer's plod. She absorbed it without retort, Her competence a quiet counterpoint, navigating the bog without a stumble, her footing sure on the slick peat where others cursed and slipped. By the 8th mile, the estate opened into a vast training plain, marked by weathered observation posts and the distant silhouette of firing butts. The platoon halted for a brief stand easy. Canteens passed around under Ellis's watchful eye. 5 minutes. Hydrate, but no slacking. The men dropped packs and stretched, the steam of their breath mingling with the mist. Hargrove knelt to adjust her laces, her gloved fingers working methodically when Jenkins approached, Davies trailing like a shadow. He loomed over her, hands on his hips, water bottle dangling from one finger. "Come on, Lance Corporal. You're holding us back with that kit. Pass us your pack. Might lighten your load, make you look less like the weak link." She rose slowly, meeting his gaze with that steady reserve, but said nothing. Jenkins, emboldened by the pause, reached out and grabbed her sleeve. A firm tug at the cuff, pulling her arm toward him as if to inspect the webbing. "What's this, then? More hand-me-downs. No wonder you're always last." The fabric strained, the platoon's eyes turning as the drizzle thickened. Davies chuckled, but the moment hung, a violation of the unspoken boundaries that governed even the roughest banter. Hargrove's jaw tightened fractionally, her free hand steady at her side, but she didn't pull away or raise her voice. Just silence, enduring the public disrespect as the rain drummed on helmets. Ellis's bark cut through from across the plain. "Jenkins, on your feet, we're moving." The private released her sleeve with a smirk, stepping back as the column reformed. "Just helping out, Sarge," he muttered, but the damage lingered, a subtle fracture in the ranks, witnessed by all. Hargrove shouldered her pack unaided, falling in without a word, her sleeve damp where his grip had twisted it. The march resumed, the pace quickening toward the final push, boots pounding the earth in unison. Whispers followed her now, not just mockery but an undercurrent of unease. Had she let him get away with it? Was she truly as competent as her shooting scores suggested, or just tolerant of the hierarchy's cruelties? The last 2 miles tested the platoon's mettle, the path climbing a steep incline scarred by erosion, the wind whipping across the exposed ridge. Legs burned, packs felt heavier with every step, and the rain turned the ground to a treacherous slick. Jenkins faltered first among the vocal ones, his banter fading to grunts, but not before one final jab over his shoulder. "Keep up, Hargrove. Don't want to be the one dragging the average down." She pressed on, her breathing controlled, posture unbroken. The worn edges of her boots caked in mud once more. As the barracks came into view, red brick low against the grey horizon, the platoon staggered to a halt at the finish line, chalked on the parade square. Ellis clocked the times, his pace stick-marking the gravel. 38 minutes over the 12, a solid tab for fresh recruits. Cheers erupted, exhausted but triumphant, as packs were shed and water distributed. Hargrove arrived not last but mid-pack, her time unremarkable, yet her form impeccable, no signs of the strain that bowed others. She stood apart as the platoon milled, wiping rain from her face with the back of her hand, the grabbed sleeve a faint crease in the fabric. In the ablutions after, as the men stripped off sodden layers under the hiss of showers, the incident replayed in low tones. "Did you see Jenkins grab her?" "Bold, that," one private said to another, steam clouding the mirrors. "She didn't even flinch. Tougher than she looks, maybe." But Jenkins shrugged it off in the changing area, toweling his hair. "Just a bit of fun. She's got no fire in her, boots or not." The hierarchy absorbed it. The moment filed away as another test of resilience, the base's routines marching on. Yet as Hargrove dressed in dry fatigues, the faint outline of her tattoo caught the light briefly. A subtle emblem, concealed once more by her cuff, a whisper of a past that bound her to operations beyond Aldershot's fields. The drizzle eased into evening, the square emptying as the platoon dispersed to the mess, the air carrying the promise of stew and respite. The violation had tested her silence, the injustice a public stain, but she carried it with the same quiet dignity, the crack widening imperceptibly in the garrison's ordered facade. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. The evening after the tab settled over Keogh barracks like a damp blanket, the drizzle giving way to a persistent mist, that blurred the edges of the floodlights illuminating the vehicle park. The platoon, still buzzing from the march's exertion, dispersed to their duties with the mechanical rhythm of men and women who knew no respite. In the quartermaster's stores, Lance Corporal Hargrove queued with the others for resupply. Fresh socks, cleaning kits and rations for the week's field exercise. The air inside the low-slung building carried the musty scent of oiled canvas and stacked ammunition crates, shelves lined with orderly rows of webbing and helmets under the hum of strip lights. She presented her logbook to the storeman, a grizzled warrant officer with a clipboard in hand, his movements precise as he ticked off items. "Standard draw, Lance Corporal," he said, his voice a gravelly monotone, sliding a bundle across the counter without flourish. Hargrove nodded, gathering the kit into her arms, the weight familiar against her chest. As she turned to leave, her sleeve rode up slightly from the load, a momentary exposure of the faded ink on her inner forearm, the subtle curve of wings arching over a dagger's hilt, etched in black that had softened with time. The storeman paused, his pen hovering mid-air, eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second before he resumed his notations. No words passed, just a subtle shift in his posture, a straightening of the shoulders that spoke of recognition buried deep in years of service. Hargrove tugged the sleeve down instinctively, her expression unchanging, and exited into the mist-shrouded yard. Outside, the base stirred with an undercurrent of unusual activity. Lorries rumbled to a halt near the officers' mess, their headlights cutting through the gloom, disgorging a small cadre of figures in subdued camouflage. No badges gleaming, no ranks overt on their sleeves. They moved with the quiet economy of men accustomed to shadows, unloading equipment cases with muffled thuds, their conversation limited to clipped nods and gestures. This was no ordinary attachment. Whispers had circulated earlier that afternoon from the signals office, a visiting element from Hereford, the SAS selection cadre, here for a joint assessment on counter-insurgency tactics. The regiment's presence was rare, unannounced, a ripple in the pond of Aldershot's routines that set the garrison on edge without fanfare. Sergeant Major Ellis caught sight of them from the platoon office window, his teacup pausing midway to his lips. "Bloody Hereford boys," he muttered to Corporal Reed, who stood nearby sorting duty rosters. "Come for the Rangers tomorrow. Keep the lads sharp. No slacking." Reed nodded, but his gaze lingered on the group as they filed toward the transient quarters, their boots silent on the wet concrete. Among them was Captain Harlan Voss, a tall figure with the lean build of one who had passed through the Brecon Beacon's brutal trials and emerged unmarked, save for the steel in his eyes. Voss's face was unremarkable. Close-cropped hair greying at the temples, a jaw set in perpetual quiet. But his presence commanded space without effort, the air around him thickening with unspoken authority. The following dawn broke with a clarity that chased the mist from the training fields, the sun, a pale disk, low over the Surrey hills. The platoon assembled at 0600 for the joint briefing, the parade square transformed into a hive of preparation, markers laid for simulated patrols, instructors from the Pathfinders School directing traffic with hand signals. Hargrove stood in her section, rifle slung, her boots now caked anew from a pre-dawn kit check, but holding their form. The mockery from the tab had simmered to a low hum, Jenkins and Davies exchanging glances but keeping their distance under Ellis's eye. But the air held a new tension, the arrival of the visitors injecting a layer of scrutiny into every movement. Captain Voss and his team observed from the periphery, positioned near the observation post with binoculars in hand, their forms still against the low brick wall. They wore no distinctive insignia, just the standard multi-terrain pattern that blended with the landscape, but the platoon sensed the difference, the way they scanned the ground not with casual interest, but with the precision of operators assessing threats in hostile terrain. As the briefing commenced, Major Cartwright outlining the exercise scenarios, his voice carrying across the square in measured tones, Voss's gaze drifted methodically over the ranks. It settled on Hargrove for a beat longer than the rest, noting the subtle details. The even spacing of her feet, the relaxed grip on her weapon that belied readiness, the faint scar on her knuckles visible as she adjusted her sling. During the initial patrol drill, the platoon moved out in fire teams across the heathland, navigating mock urban obstacles erected overnight, HESCO barriers simulating compounds, pop-up targets mimicking insurgents. Hargrove's team took the left flank, Reed leading with hand signals through the gorse. She moved with an instinctual flow, low and fluid, covering angles without command, her eyes sweeping the terrain in arcs honed by experience beyond basic training. Jenkins, in the adjacent team, stumbled on a concealed wire, his curse muffled as he disentangled himself, drawing a sharp whisper from Davies. "Watch it, you clot!" But Hargrove pressed forward unerringly, neutralizing a target with a controlled burst from her blank-firing adapter, her form textbook yet understated. No excess motion, just efficiency. From the ridge, Voss lowered his binoculars, his expression unchanging, but he tilted his head slightly toward his sergeant, a wiry man named Hale with a faint scar tracing his cheekbone. No words, just a nod toward Hargrove's position, Hale's eyes following suit. They had seen it before, the quiet discipline, the economy of movement that marked those who had brushed against the regiment's world. As the teams rotated for the next phase, a brief halt at the water point, Hargrove knelt to refill her canteen, her sleeve inching up once more in the motion. The tattoo flashed briefly in the morning light, unmistakable to those who knew its significance. The winged dagger, emblem of the SAS, awarded in the shadows of selection or attached operations, a mark not lightly borne. Hale's posture stiffened imperceptibly, his hand pausing on his own canteen. Voss observed without comment, his stillness a form of acknowledgement, the respect conveyed in the absence of scrutiny rather than its weight. Back at the post as the exercise resumed, Voss made a single notation in his pad, initials, a date from years past, before folding it away. The platoon carried on, oblivious to the observer's quiet interest, the heathland alive with the crack of blanks and the shouts of umpires. Hargrove reintegrated seamlessly, her competence a thread in the weave, but the visitor's arrival had introduced a subtle shift, like the first stirrings of wind before a front moves in. By midday, as the teams debriefed under the shade of camouflage netting, the mist returning in wisps from the dew, Voss approached the group indirectly. He conferred with Cartwright in low tones near the command tent, the major's nods deferential. The exchange devoid of volume. No direct address to the ranks, no overt intervention, just the presence watching. Hargrove, wiping sweat from her brow during the break, felt the weight of unseen eyes, but her reserve held, posture erect, as she reviewed her team's log. The hierarchy remained intact, the routines unbroken, yet the observer's stillness hinted at depths beneath the surface, a recognition stirring in the quiet spaces of Aldershot's ordered expanse. The afternoon wore on with live-fire integration, the range's backstops rising against the skyline, the sharp reports echoing across the estate. Hargrove's shots grouped tightly once more, her breathing steady through the bipod, but it was the small things that drew Hale's prolonged gaze. The way she cleared a malfunction without breaking rhythm, the instinctive scan after each string. Jenkins, struggling with his own rifle's feed, earned a barked correction from Reed, his earlier bravado muted in the visitor's shadow. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows over the gravel paths back to barracks, the SAS element withdrew to their transient lines, their departure as unobtrusive as their arrival. Whispers among the platoon turned to the ghosts from Hereford, speculation laced with awe, but Hargrove moved through it unchanged, her hidden past a silent undercurrent, observed but unspoken. In the mess that evening, over plates of bangers and mash, the day's events filtered into conversation, Ellis recounting Voss's reputation in hushed tones to the NCOs, the privates speculating on classified drills. Hargrove sat at her usual end, fork steady, the tattoo concealed once more. The observers had noticed, their stillness a bridge to what lay ahead, the base's rhythms carrying forward under the weight of impending revelation. The midday sun hung low over the training estate, its light filtered through a veil of high cirrus clouds that softened the edges of the Aldershot landscape. The joint exercise had escalated into its final phase, a simulated assault on a defended position, the heathland scarred by mock fortifications of sandbags and wire, umpires' flags snapping in the intermittent breeze. Chaos Barracks' routines had yielded to this orchestrated chaos, the platoon integrated with the visiting SAS element, for a demonstration of fire and movement. Lorries idled at the perimeter, their engines a low thrum, while the air carried the acrid tang of cordite from earlier volleys, mingling with the earthy scent of trampled gorse. Lance Corporal Hargrove's fire team advanced along the left axis, Corporal Reed signalling flanks with terse hand gestures, the platoon stretched in bounding overwatch. Her position was rear guard, rifle at the ready, scanning the undulating terrain for simulated threats. The boots that had drawn such derision, now mud-caked and unyielding, propelled her forward with measured strides, her silhouette low against the horizon. Private Jenkins, 2 teams over, covered his sector with less assurance, his earlier confidence eroded by the observer's presence, though he still cast occasional glances her way, a smirk lingering beneath his helmet. Captain Harlan Voss directed his cadre from the elevated command ridge, a modest rise flanked by portable screens displaying tactical overlays. He stood motionless, arms folded, his gaze dissecting the maneuver with the precision of one who had orchestrated far deadlier engagements. Beside him, Sergeant Hale adjusted the focus on a spotting scope, his expression impassive, but the subtle exchange of nods between them betrayed the culmination of their observations. The tattoo, the fluid competence, the unyielding silence, it all aligned with fragments from classified briefings, echoes of a support operation in the Hindu Kush 3 years prior, where an attached intelligence liaison had pulled a 4-man patrol from the brink of compromise. As the assault crested the objective, the umpire's whistles pierced the din, halting the exercise in a cacophony of shouts and lowered weapons. The platoon regrouped on the open plain, steam rising from exertion-dampened uniforms, breaths ragged in the cooling air. Major Cartwright strode forward to debrief, his boots sinking slightly into the soft turf. The company guidon planted nearby like a sentinel. "Form up, 3 platoon. Captain Voss will address the performance." The ranks snapped to attention, rifles grounded. The gravelly shift of feet the only sound as Voss approached, his team arrayed behind him in a loose semicircle, still watchful, their presence a quiet imposition on the hierarchy. Voss halted before the formation, his eyes sweeping the lines with deliberate slowness, settling finally on Hargrove at the rear of her section. The platoon held its collective breath, the wind whispering through the heather, carrying the faint chime of a distant bell from the garrison chapel. Jenkins shifted imperceptibly, his posture straightening under the scrutiny, while Davies avoided eye contact, focusing on a fixed point in the distance. Ellis stood to Cartwright's flank, his face a mask of professional neutrality, pace stick tucked under his arm. "Lance Corporal Hargrove," Voss said, his voice low and even, carrying across the plain without elevation, the clipped consonants of his Hereford accent underscoring the gravity. The name hung in the air, drawing every gaze to her, boots planted firm, chin level, hands clasped behind her back. She met his eyes without flinching, a flicker of recognition passing between them, subtle as the shift of light on polished brass. No surprise in her stance, just that reserved poise, the internal tension betrayed only by the brief tightening of her knuckles. The captain continued, his tone measured, devoid of theatrics. "Step forward." She did so, her boots crunching softly on the turf, halting 3 paces from him. The platoon remained frozen, the hierarchy's rigid lines now a tableau of anticipation. Voss regarded her for a moment, then extended his right hand, not in greeting but in a gesture that parted the air toward her sleeve. With a nod of permission, Hargrove rolled it back, exposing the tattoo in full. The winged dagger, its lines faded but unmistakable, the insignia of the Special Air Service etched into skin that had seen service beyond the regiment's standard bounds. A murmur escaped the ranks, stifled quickly under Cartwright's sharp glance, but Voss raised a hand, silencing it utterly. "This mark," he said, addressing the formation directly, his words precise as a rifle report, "is not issued lightly. It signifies attachment to operations under the regiment's directive. 3 years ago, in a valley north of Kabul, Lance Corporal Hargrove, then attached to 14 Intelligence Company, intercepted a signal that compromised a patrol. Her analysis, under fire and without support, redirected assets that extracted 4 operators intact. Lives owed to her vigilance, classified under eyes-only protocols. The revelation landed like a suppressed round, the plane falling into absolute stillness. Jenkins's face drained of color, his earlier grabs and jibes replaying in the collective memory. Davies stared at the ground, shame etching his features. Ellis's jaw set, a rare crack in his composure, while Reed's eyes widened fractionally, respect dawning in the quiet. Hargrove stood unmoved, her gaze steady on Voss, the internal weight of the moment expressed in the subtle rise of her shoulders, a release long deferred. Voss's next action mirrored the unspoken code of recognition. He snapped a salute, crisp and formal, his hand arcing to the brow with the precision drilled into every soldier, yet weighted by the shadows of Hereford. The platoon froze deeper, the wind alone stirring the guidon. Cartwright followed suit, his eagles catching the light, then Ellis, the sergeant major's pace stick forgotten at his side. One by one the ranks saluted, privates to majors, the gesture rippling outward like a wave across the heathland. No cheers, no exclamations, just the salute's solemn rhythm, boots rooted, eyes locked forward in silent acknowledgement. Hargrove returned it evenly, her arm steady, the tattoo a bridge between past and present. Shame spread through the lines like mist rolling in. Jenkins' head bowed slightly, the mockery's sting turning inward, whispers of apology unspoken but evident in averted gazes. Respect rose in its place, a quiet transformation etching into postures, shoulders squaring, the underestimation dissolving into the ether. Voss lowered his hand first, nodding once to Hargrove, a call sign unspoken, echo from that Afghan night, before stepping back. "Carry on, Major." The debrief resumed, but the air had shifted irrevocably, the exercise's mechanics proceeding under a new gravity. As the platoon dispersed toward the transport, packs shouldered with renewed purpose, Hargrove fell in at the rear once more, her boots now symbols of endurance rather than jest. The sun broke through fully, casting long shadows over the estate, the distant hum of helicopters from the airfield, a counterpoint to the base's evolving hush. Aldershot's routines would reclaim the day, but the reckoning had etched its mark, a testament to moral courage amid the ranks' unyielding order. In the changing rooms later, as fatigues were shared and the scent of damp wool filled the air, the silence lingered. Jenkins approached Hargrove at her locker, his voice low, devoid of bravado. "Lance Corporal." "I didn't know." She met his eyes briefly, her response a simple nod, the reserve unbroken, the hierarchy bent, not broke, discipline's quiet honor prevailing in the aftermath. The afternoon debrief dragged into the lengthening shadows, the heathland's undulations now bathed in the amber hue of a Hampshire sunset, the cirrus clouds streaking the sky like faded regimental ribbons. Major Cartwright's voice carried on, outlining adjustments to the patrol formations, but the platoon's attention fractured under the weight of what had transpired. Rifles rested against shoulders, packs slung low, yet the formation held its rigid lines, the gravel beneath their boots still warm from the day's exertions. The air hung heavy with the residue of blank rounds and sweat-soaked webbing, a faint breeze rustling the gorse that bordered the training plain. Lance Corporal Elena Hargrove stood at ease in her section, her posture unaltered, boots planted shoulder-width, hands clasped loosely at her sides, the rolled sleeve now tugged back into place over the tattoo. The winged dagger lay concealed once more, its revelation a fleeting exposure that had reshaped the space around her. Captain Voss and his SAS cadre had withdrawn to the command tent, their silhouettes visible through the flap as they conferred with low murmurs, maps unrolled on a folding table. No fanfare marked their departure from the debrief, just the quiet efficiency of men who operated beyond the parade square's glare. Sergeant Major Ellis paced the front of the ranks, his pace stick tapping a subdued rhythm against his thigh, the earlier salute still echoing in his measured gait. He halted before Hargrove's fire team, eyes scanning the privates with renewed intent. "3 platoon," he said, his voice a gravelly anchor amid the hush. Today's exercise exposed more than tactical flaws. It laid bare the cost of assumptions. Lance Corporal Hargrove's service reminds us that competence isn't always loud. It's in the steady hand, the unspoken resolve. From this point, every man and woman here will conduct themselves with the respect due to a comrade's unseen burdens. Dismissed to barracks by sections. The order rippled through the formation, boots shifting as the platoon broke into smaller groups, the crunch of gravel marking their dispersal toward the waiting Land Rovers. Private Jenkins lingered at the edge of his team, his rifle slung awkwardly. The colour returned to his face, but his eyes downcast, tracing patterns in the turf. Davies walked beside him in silence, the usual banter absent, replaced by the weight of shared complicity. Corporal Reed clapped a hand on Jenkins's shoulder as they boarded the transport. Not harshly, but firmly, his nod toward Hargrove a silent directive to reflect. The engine growled to life, tyres gripping the rutted track back to Keogh Barracks, the heathland receding in the rear-view mirrors like a chapter closing. In the platoon room that evening, the low-ceilinged space hummed with the subdued clatter of kit maintenance. Rifles stripped on trestle tables, boots aligned in rows under the harsh glow of overhead bulbs. The scent of gun oil and leather polish permeated the air, mingling with the faint steam from mugs of tea cooling on window ledges. Hargrove claimed her corner bench, methodically cleaning her SA-80, the bolt cycling with oiled precision. No one approached her directly at first. The room's rhythm adjusted around her. Privates stealing glances before returning to their tasks, the hierarchy's subtle realignments evident in straightened postures and averted jests. Jenkins entered last, his day sack thudding to the floor near the door. He hesitated, then crossed the room with deliberate steps, halting a respectful distance from her bench. The other recruits paused mid-motion, brushes hovering over boots, cloths draped over barrels, the air thickening with anticipation. "Lance Corporal Hargrove," he said, his Manchester accent subdued, lacking its earlier edge. "What I did on the tab, grabbing your sleeve like that, it was out of order, no excuse. I didn't know about the tattoo, the op. Won't happen again." His words hung plain, no embellishment, just the raw admission of a young soldier confronting his lapse. Hargrove looked up from her rifle, her eyes meeting his steadily, the reserve in her expression softening fractionally, not to warmth, but to acknowledgement. "Noted, Private," she replied, her West Country lilt even devoid of recrimination. "We all learn on the march. Keep your eyes front from here." She returned to her cleaning, the metallic click resuming, but the exchange lingered, a quiet pivot in the room's atmosphere. Jenkins nodded, retreating to his own kit with a murmured, "Yes, ma'am," the title slipping out unbidden, a mark of the shifting respect. Word spread through the barracks like mist seeping under doors. In the sergeant's mess over plates of gammon and eggs, Ellis recounted the revelation to a cluster of NCOs, his tone measured. "She's got regiment ties, attached intel, pulled our lads out of the fire in Afghan. Boots or no, she's earned her square." The colour sergeant raised his mug in a silent toast, the gesture propagating through the circle, no need for volume. Major Cartwright, overhearing from his desk, made a notation in the company log. A commendation for Hargrove's undisclosed service, routed through channels that would echo to regimental HQ without fanfare. By stand easy, the transformation deepened. During the evening kit inspection, Ellis circled the platoon with his usual scrutiny, but when he reached Hargrove, his gaze lingered on her boots. Now polished to a regulation sheen, the cracks filled but unhidden. "Turnout approved, Lance Corporal," he said, his voice carrying a note of quiet endorsement. No extra duties assigned, no lingering critique, just the nod of institutional respect, the hierarchy bending to accommodate her quiet legend. The recruits watched, Jenkins among them, their earlier mockery transmuted into deference, questions about the tattoo unspoken, but the aura of her competence now palpable, like the steady drum of boots on the drill square. Outside, the Aldershot night settled in, the floodlights casting pools of yellow over the parade square, the Union Jack furled against the flagpole for the evening. Distant voices from the NAFI carried faintly, soldiers discussing the day's events in low tones, the story of Hargrove's past weaving into the garrison's oral tapestry. She stepped out for air, leaning against the cool brick of the barracks wall, the chill nipping at her collar. The base's rhythms persisted, a patrol vehicle idling at the gate, the muffled laughter from the private's block now laced with respect rather than ridicule. Shame had spread through the ranks like a ground frost, thawing into resolve. No grand apologies, just the subtle shift in eye contact, the space afforded in lines and conversations. In the transient quarters, Captain Voss reviewed his notes by the light of a desk lamp, Sergeant Hale at his side. "Echo's still got it," Voss murmured, using the old call sign from that Kabul night, his pen scratching a final endorsement. "Recommend formal recognition. Quiet channels." Hale nodded, the pair's stillness a testament to the regiment's code. Honor acknowledged not in parades, but in the enduring fabric of service. The base carried on, its ordered hush enveloping the change, Hargrove's silence now a cornerstone rather than a shadow. As the clock struck 2000 hours, the platoon room emptied, lights dimming to red for night watch. Hargrove shouldered her day sack and made for her bunk, the weight lighter somehow, the worn soles of her boots echoing softly down the corridor. Aldershot's quiet professionalism prevailed, the moral courage of one soldier rippling outward, reforming the ranks without a word wasted. The night deepened, stars pricking the clearing sky, and the garrison held its breath for the days ahead. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Elena Hargrove reach those who still believe in honor. The days following the revelation on the heathland unfolded with the unhurried precision of Keogh barracks routines, the Aldershot garrison resuming its cadence, as if the shift in the platoon's undercurrents were merely another layer of morning mist. Dawn inspections returned at 0600 sharp, the parade square's gravel still damp underfoot, the air crisp with the scent of dew-kissed pines bordering the estate. Sergeant Major Ellis's pace stick tapped its familiar rhythm, but the lines formed with a subtle deference now, boots aligning not just to order but to an unspoken equity. Lance Corporal Elena Hargrove stood in her place at the second rank's end, her boots, those once mocked relics, polished to a subdued gleam, the leather's cracks a testament to endurance rather than neglect. No jibes greeted her turnout that first morning after. Private Jenkins, positioned 3 files over, kept his gaze forward, his ginger hair tucked neatly under his beret. The earlier bravado evaporated like breath on cold glass. When Ellis called for rifles at the slope, Jenkins's movement was crisp, his eyes flicking briefly to Hargrove's steady form before snapping back. The platoon marched to the assault course without the undercurrent of whispers, the crunch of gravel a unified pulse, the wind carrying only the faint call of a rook from the distant tree line. Hargrove's pace matched the columns, her pack slung low, the weight distributed with the economy that had always marked her, now observed rather than overlooked. In the cookhouse at midday, the long tables groaned under tureens of Irish stew and crusty bread, steam curling upward to mingle with the aroma of fresh-brewed tea from the urns. Hargrove collected her tray as before, choosing the end seat, but the space around her adjusted. Davies, who had once echoed Jenkins's barbs, slid in across from her with a nod, his plate clattering softly. "Solid work on the range yesterday, Lance Corporal," he said, his voice low and even, the words unadorned by flattery. No elaboration, no probing questions about the tattoo or the Afghan valley, just the acknowledgement, delivered with the restraint of a soldier weighing his own measure. Hargrove inclined her head slightly, fork pausing mid-air. "Team effort, Private. Keep your groupings tight." The exchange passed without fanfare, but it rippled outward, privates at adjacent tables falling silent mid-conversation, their postures straightening as they returned to their meals. The transformation deepened through the week's field exercises, the platoon tabbing across the Surrey heaths under leaden skies, packs heavy with simulated loads. Rain pattered steadily, turning paths to rivulets of mud that sucked at boot heels, the air thick with the metallic tang of wet foliage. Hargrove led her fire team on point for the first rotation, a role assigned by Corporal Reed without comment, his glance conveying trust earned in silence. She navigated the contours with instinctive clarity, signaling halts at obscured ridges, directing flanks through whispered commands that cut through the downpour. Jenkins, now in her section, covered the rear without protest, his strides matching hers, the grab on the previous tab a ghost relegated to memory. When the column crested the final incline, Ellis clocked the time. 35 minutes, a personal best for the platoon, Hargrove's unerring pace at the fore. Whispers, when they came, had changed timbre. In the ablutions block after the tab, under the hiss of showers and the steam-fogged mirrors, privates gathered in clusters, voices hushed like confessions. Heard she was Echo. Pulled Voss's lot out of a hot spot, one murmured, toweling his hair with vigorous strokes. Regiment Inc., proper attached. No wonder she doesn't rattle. Another nodded, scrubbing mud from his webbing. Boots held the whole way. Legend, that. The word spread through the barracks like the low hum of generators at night, transforming Hargrove from an unremarkable figure into a quiet emblem, her silence now interpreted as the depth of one who had stared down shadows far grimmer than Aldershot's drills. Even the hierarchy reflected the shift. During evening stand-easy in the platoon office, Major Cartwright summoned Hargrove for a private word, the room's bare walls lined with faded maps of past campaigns, the scent of pipe tobacco lingering from the colour sergeant's habit. He stood behind his desk, hands flat on the polished oak, his eagles catching the lamplight. "Lance Corporal," he began, his received pronunciation measured, "Captain Voss's endorsement has been noted at battalion level. Your service, classified as it was, warrants formal recognition in due course. Quiet channels, of course. The regiment values such discretion." Hargrove stood at ease, her response a simple affirmation. "Understood, sir. Duty as always." No elaboration on the tattoo's weight or the valley's echoes. Just the reserve that bound her to the code. Cartwright nodded, dismissing her with a salute that she returned crisply, the door clicking shut behind her like a bolt chambered. From the sergeant's mess to the private's block, respect manifested in small, internal ways. A space yielded in the queue at the water bowsers. Eye contact held a beat longer during inspections. The involuntary straightening when she entered a room. Ellis, ever the backbone, incorporated her experience subtly into briefings, references to unseen assets in patrol scenarios, his gravelly tone underscoring the moral courage that underpinned competence. No one mocked the boots now. They had become symbols, scuffed souls tracing paths of silent honor, outlasting the platoon in endurance if not in flash. Weeks blurred into the regiment's relentless cycle. Marksmanship on the butts, where Hargrove's scores drew nods from the rangemaster. Night exercises under flare-illuminated skies, her vigilance a steady anchor. The whispers evolved into legend retold in the naffy over pints of bitter on off-duty evenings. The story of the Lance Corporal who outran doubt itself, woven into the garrison's fabric. Yet Hargrove remained unchanged, her posture reserved, emotions guarded behind the steady gaze that had weathered mockery and revelation alike. She volunteered for the grunt task still, stacking sandbags at the perimeter, assisting with vehicle maintenance in the park's oily hush, but now with quiet emulation from others, the platoon's cohesion tightening like a well-oiled rifle. As autumn deepened, the leaves turning russet along the South Downs flanks, Aldershot's cold air carried a reflective chill over the training yards. The parade square, etched with boot prints from countless drills, stood as a monument to British discipline, rigid, unyielding, yet capable of quiet reform when honor demanded it. Hargrove's transformation of the ranks around her more than herself embodied that ethos, a reminder that true mettle lay not in volume or spectacle, but in the internal resolve that saluted the unseen. The base pressed on, its hierarchies intact, the silent honor of one soldier rippling through the ranks like the echo of boots on gravel at dawn, enduring long after the mist had cleared. The winter solstice approached Aldershot with its characteristic restraint, the days shortening to a pallid grey that cloaked Keogh Barracks in a hush, broken only by the muffled cadence of boots on frost-rimed gravel. The parade square, now etched with the faint scars of recent snowfalls, gleamed under the weak December sun, its surface a canvas for the regiment's unyielding routines. At 0600, 3 platoon assembled as always, breath clouding the air like ephemeral signals, rifles at the slope and postures aligned in the rigid lines that defined their world. The Union Jack stirred faintly from its pole, its fabric crisp against the chill, while the distant lowing of traffic from the A331 hinted at the civilian life beyond the wire. Lance Corporal Elena Hargrove occupied her familiar position at the second rank's end, her boots, those weathered companions of mockery and march, standing firm on the cold stone, the leather now supple from meticulous care, its patina a subtle badge of trials endured. No sidelong glances met her turnout. The recruit's eyes remained fixed forward, chins level, the hierarchy's subtle currents flowing with a newfound equilibrium. Sergeant Major Ellis paced the front, his pace stick tapping a steady metronome against his thigh, the lines on his face deepened by the season's bite. "Eyes front, platoon," he intoned, his voice a low rumble carrying over the frost, scanning the ranks without favor or fault. The inspection passed in silence, Hargrove's form blending seamlessly into the order, her competence no longer a whisper, but an accepted foundation. As the platoon dismissed to the assault course, the ground crunching underfoot with each step, Private Jenkins fell in beside Davies without the old ease of banter. The tab ahead, a 10-mile circuit through the iced heathland, demanded focus. Packs weighted with winter kit and the weight of lessons learned. Jenkins adjusted his straps, his ginger hair dusted with rime under his beret, and cast a brief, respectful nod toward Hargrove as she shouldered her own load. No words passed, just the acknowledgement in his steadied gait, the earlier grab on her sleeve relegated to the fog of forgotten lapses. The column moved out, boots striking the path in unison, the air sharp with the scent of frozen gorse and distant wood smoke from the garrison's chimneys. Hargrove took point without assignment, her strides economical, navigating the slick inclines with the quiet assurance that had outpaced doubt itself. The platoon followed, breath synchronized in the cold, no stragglers mocking the rear. By the halfway mark where the path crested a ridge overlooking the Farnborough airfield, its runways a distant gleam under the low clouds, Ellis called a brief halt. Canteens sloshed as they hydrated, the steam rising like battlefield signals. Corporal Reed, conferring with his section, included Hargrove in the low exchange about route adjustments, his tone deferential. "Your read on the terrain, Lance Corporal?" She responded evenly, pointing to a shadowed dip ahead. "Flank left to avoid the ice patch, Corporal. Safer ground." He nodded, implementing it without demur, the decision rippling through the ranks as they pressed on. The whispers that once eroded her silence had evolved into murmurs of quiet legend, shared in the ablution's steam or the mess hall's warmth. In the evenings, as the platoon gathered around the potbelly stove in the block, privates recounted the tale in hushed tones, not with embellishment, but the restrained awe of soldiers who had glimpsed the regiment's shadow. Echo, they called her, one would say, polishing his rifle under the red glow of nightlights, the metallic scrape punctuating the quiet. Outran the lot in Afghan then here. Boots held when nothing else did. Jenkins, once the instigator, contributed sparingly now, his voice subdued. Learned that the hard way, respect's earned in the grind. No probing for details on the tattoo or the valley's perils. The code demanded discretion, the honor internal, expressed in the space they afforded her at tables and in lines. Institutional respect permeated the hierarchy, like the steady seep of frost into stone. Major Cartwright, during a company address in the drill hall, its walls echoing with the ghosts of past parades, referenced the exercise without naming her directly. "Unseen service bolsters us all," he said, his eagles glinting under the vaulted beams, the scent of oiled floors rising around them. "It reminds that discipline honors the quiet as much as the command." Ellis, in platoon briefings, wove her example into the fabric, a nod to vigilance during night watches, the moral courage that steadied a patrol under unseen strain. Even the quartermaster, that grizzled sentinel of stores, greeted her with a clipped salute when she drew kit, his earlier glimpse of the winged dagger now a bond unspoken. Through the solstice exercises, live fire in the butts under sodium lamps, their reports cracking the night like winter branches, Hargrove's presence anchored the platoon. Her scores remained impeccable, groupings tight against the target's white faces, but it was the subtle guidance she offered. A corrective hand on a private's stance, a measured word during malfunction drills that etched her legacy. No excess heroism marked her days, just the reserved progression, emotions guarded in posture and eye contact, the internal dignity that had weathered injustice now a model for the ranks. As Yuletide approached, the base softened fractionally. Holly sprigs pinned to the mess doors, the faint carol of a choir from the chapel drifting on the wind. But the routines held firm. In the naffy, over mugs of mulled tea, the story of Hargrove's boots circulated as lore. how they had outrun 47 souls across the heaths, symbolizing the endurance that silenced mockery. She sat among them now, not apart, her laughter rare but genuine when a young recruit shared a tale of his own first tab. The transformation was complete, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet realignment. No one mocked, whispers built rather than broke, her status a legend woven into the garrison's warp. Aldershot's winter deepened, the parade square blanketed in a light skim of snow that muffled the dawn drills, the cold air over the training yards carrying the essence of British discipline, rigid, reserved yet profoundly adaptive. Hargrove's journey embodied that silent honor, a soldier who confronted injustice not with volume, but with the unyielding posture of one who had saved lives in shadows, earning recognition that reformed the ranks without fanfare. In the Army's ordered world, such moral courage endured like the echo of boots on eternal gravel, a testament to the quiet professionalism that bound them all, outlasting seasons and doubts alike. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of the recruits laughed at her boots until she outran all 47 of them in Aldershot. See you in the next one.